Welcome to this new show, to this new episode about Israel and Palestine. This time, we are going to address some issues that are normally neglected in the media. And as you can see in the description of this video, my sources to question the way this issue has been treated in the media come from reputable sources. Why are they not addressing these considerations? You would have to ask them. Number one is that Hamas and Hezbollah are insurgencies. They wage unconventional war. They are not regular armies with navies and air forces. No. That means that as Mao Zedong, the guy who took over China in 1949, as he said, insurgencies are fluid. They camouflage in the population. That means you cannot beat them. Sorry. That means you cannot beat them with 2,000 pound or even 200-pound bombs. That's why you see that bizarre scene of the IDF, the Israel's army, playing guacamole with Hamas. They said at first that they were going to push Hamas to the south. They closed the borders, so their plan was going to be originally to push Hamas against the south and destroy Hamas. That didn't work. If you follow the news, you will see that they have been then fighting against Hamas in the center, then again in the north. Most recently, they have launched another campaign in the north, and then again in the south, and then in the north. So this is ridiculous because you cannot beat insurgencies that way. How do you beat insurgencies? We will talk about that in another show in more detail. Then you can see the media giving us account of the body count, but the body count doesn't work. It was the criteria, the main criterion used by us in Vietnam. All the number of bad guys we have killed in Vietnam, that didn't work. The same thing in Iraq. The body count didn't work. And even in the case of Afghanistan, it backfired because when we depleted all the leadership of the Taliban, they were replaced by even more radical Taliban with whom we could not negotiate. And we know how it ended. Besides the chaotic way the withdrawal of Afghanistan was implemented, the fact was that all those errors made by successive administrations, both Republican and Democratic, have led to the surge of the Taliban, and we know what happened. Then, and this is very important, insurgencies are political wars. Who was the military leader of the Vietnamese army during the Vietnam War? General Yap. General Yap realized this, and that's why he said that the Tet Offensive was a victory, while based on the body count, the the American generals said that the Tet Offensive have failed and that it was an American victory. A few years later, we were leaving Afghanistan and the insurgency claimed victory. So these are, above all, political wars that require political solutions. That means you have to create a political system, political institutions that can be either because you have negotiated with the insurgents or because you have you have been able to create those institutions to isolate politically the insurgents. You need a political solution. In the case of Palestine, there is no political solution without a workable Palestinian Authority. With a workable Palestinian Authority, you could use the model of Ireland 1998, the Good Friday Agreement that allowed peace to return to Ireland and England. But that requires an overhaul of the Palestinian Authority. And why do you need an overhaul of the Palestinian Authority? The answer is in 2006, because they lost that election. And why did they lose those elections to Hamas? Because number one, the Palestinian Authority was very corrupt. Number two, they have become henchmen of the Israeli government that use it to crash on dissident opinions. So how do you address that? Well, we have in the European Union, just to give you an example, standards to prevent corruption, and that you can implement, but you cannot implement them immediately. You need time. But it's possible. The same way in terms of democracy. Despite the case of Orban in Hungary, the European Union also provides these standards to make endemic corruption less likely. So you can address that, but you need time. And that means that you need sometimes to build those institutions. And this is where I will retake in a couple of minutes, this issue again. You could use the Olmer plan that implies an occupation by an Arab, an international army. So they can control security to prevent Hamas from torpedoing your new institutions. That way, either Hamas joins the agreement or it becomes irrelevant. Has this been discussed seriously in the media? No. We have Ireland 1998, this precedent, and has this been reason enough for the media to address it? Nope. Then, what we see the media focused on is military victories, but these are tactical. It means they don't produce strategic long-term victories. And this is short-sighted, unless what you want to impose is the Chechen solution. What is the Chechen solution? It comes from the time of the Second Chechen War in Russia, where practically you destroy the country. You turn in the case of Chechnya into a failed state, so you can impose a strongman and you create peace, that version of peace. That reminds us from the Reagan influence in Central America, yes. And no wonder they are also failed states. So you can, if you base your counterinsurgency in tactical victories, your only hope is that. And that is not what we are looking for, because you will have an endemic insurgency coming back over and over from time to time, or a failed state. Sometimes the military is blinded by this short-term tactical military victories, and this happened in 1956 to 57 in the so-called Battle of Algiers, where the French destroy the FLN at the Kasbah, that it was the Muslim enclave in the capital of Algeria in those times. And it was very short-sighted, because by 1962, they had to leave the country. And they had to leave the country because, like in the case of Vietnam, in the case of Algeria, the war was won by the Algerians, like in the other case by the Vietnamese, in the battleground of the public opinion, and they lost. It's worth mentioning that when this war of liberation by the Algerian rebels started, it started in 1954. And what they were requesting was autonomy. So to be a region inside, an autonomous region inside France. By 1962, they were not interested in anything but independence. The parallels are so amazing that you can even see the Jewish settlers playing the role. The Pied Noirs were the French settlers in Algeria, playing, as I said, playing the role of the Pied Noirs. It's amazing how history repeats itself, especially when you have so inept people behind our foreign policy. Then another point about counterinsurgency is that it encourages other groups to try to gain visibility and influence at the expense of the cause of the insurgent group. And that's exactly what is happening with the Houthis and Hezbollah, who are using the Palestinian cause to gain influence and visibility. And as I mentioned in my tweet at the time, what we should have done is to get a solution, a real solution, not Biden ceasefire, a real solution like the one proposed by Olmert, because that would have deprived them, the Houthis and Hezbollah of their of their narrative, of the risk of their leverage in the Arab world. Instead of that, we have let them become the champions of the Palestinian cause. What are the solutions then? If there are solutions, of course. I just mentioned one. The one I like the most is the Olmert Plan. The Olmert Plan basically consists on building a workable Palestinian authority, and while we do that, have an international occupation force I would have to say, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, because of the way this war has percolated in the West Bank. And it would have to count with basically Arab forces and some American supervision, of course. But this is not the only one. There you, in foreign affairs, you have a federalist proposal made by Dajani and Yehuda, and this is a very nice proposal. I still would prefer Olmer's plan, but if this were the final solution, I would go for it. Then you have a more recent Saudi Arabia and European proposal that is still on the works because it hasn't defined the situation in Palestine, but proposes a ceasefire on all fronts. If this conducts to a Palestinian state, to, let's say it again, a Good Friday solution, then I would go for it. But here I am not counting Biden's ceasefire because it's too naive to be seriously considered. And why is it so naive? Because it depends on the goodwill of the two parties who want to derail it. And why did they want to derail it? Because both Likud and Hamas gain more votes when there is fear, where there is anguish, where there is distrust of the other. That's why they are the most belligerent parties in their own countries. So expecting that they are going to destroy their own narrative, the reason why they vote for them, just because Biden said so, is childish. And unfortunately, that has been Biden's position for 1 year, a year we have wasted with terrible consequences, as we will see. Having said that, let me leave you with our news headlines for this hour, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines for this hour. In an attempt to reconcile with the woke left of her party and following her campaign manager Jennifer O'Malley Dillon's advice, Kamala Harris has promised to appoint Whoopi Goldberg as Secretary of Education if elected. Approached about the announcement, Ms. Goldberg declared that her priorities will be demanding that every Marvel or Star Wars movie character should begin by asking the pronouns of their counterparts. B, creating 2 mandatory courses in high school, shoplifting as a revolutionary tactic, and Antifa's urban warfare strategy. Third, replacing math and science in high school with seminars about the epic war between Antifa and the Proud Boys. D, making it mandatory in history courses to mention how white people fought with the Nazis against Black Lives Matter in the Civil War. And finally, replacing the July 4th holiday with Homeless Day and replacing the joint session of Congress for the State of the Union with drag queen shows, making it mandatory in elementary school to read Cori Bush's The Crimes of White People, which calls for a holy war against depraved white people who are genetically predisposed to systemic racism. The immediate capitulation of white oppressors to be signed in Washington before representatives of Black Lives Matter, and war reparations payable in Treasury bonds in a term no longer than 6 weeks. The news has been sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemers, Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This then is the right church for you. Church of the Holy Redeemers, Power in the Holy Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven. For only a donation of $50 a month, you will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them every month. And for $100, the heavenly premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed. If you're not fully satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover Card. That's the news.
Welcome back. Now, what are the obstacles we have for a lasting ceasefire? A serious ceasefire, not Biden's. Those are two. The first one is Netanyahu, and the second is Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. With respect to Netanyahu, in November 2023, Netanyahu was at the lowest point of his popularity, and for a long time, the protests related to the hostages who have been neglected by Netanyahu gave us a lot of momentum for a serious solution. That window of opportunity is almost gone, because as you can see in the polls, the opposition is in retreat while Netanyahu is rising. And this because of the effect of the war, that this was predictable. Yes, yet the Biden administration sacrificed Ukraine, which should be our number one goal in foreign policy. China sacrificed everything for the goal of securing Netanyahu, rising popularity, and better chances in the next elections, Israeli elections. And on that, you can give Biden that he won. He got Netanyahu to research in the polls, as bizarre as it sounds. Then the other problem you have is a fragmented opposition. This opposition, as Netanyahu started to gain popularity, backpedal on the two-state solution they had supported, and they became silent on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And why is that? Because they needed a reason to coalesce around a message, and that should have been the message provided by the Biden administration using the Olmert plan. But that didn't happen. On the contrary, Biden helped Netanyahu score political gains with, for instance, the rescue of 3 hostages that enjoyed a lot of photo op and media sponsored by the Biden administration, while he gave the opposition, and even Gallant, the Minister of Defense, a cold shoulder. Then another obstacle is that Gallant is isolated. Gallant is the Minister of Defense, as I said, but he's a decent, despite he's a very hawkish member of Likud, he is a more decent part of Likud because he was against Netanyahu's assault against the Israeli Supreme Court. He was for a ceasefire to try to end the war as soon as possible, and yet the Biden administration gave all his support, all their support to Netanyahu and to Gallant again a cold shoulder. Let's remember that more than once, Netanyahu has tried to get rid of Gallant and replace it with somebody who is more in the lines with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, ministers of the Netanyahu coalition, who are leaders of the Israeli far right. And I'm not saying that. I'm not calling, it's not me who is calling them far right, it's the Israeli media. And that's it's as it sounds. So Netanyahu has preferred Ben-Gvir and Smotrich over fellow Gallant, and we have helped him to isolate Gallant. So the other obstacle is that Netanyahu's goals are to drag the USA to war with Iran. Again, assessment that comes from the Jewish media, and that it has been reiterated by all the attacks made by Israel to Iran's proxies in the area in the region. And you may say, hey, but Hezbollah started attacking Israel, and other groups like Islamic Jihad started attacking Israel, and that's true. So I'm not approving of that. But had Netanyahu not being an obstacle, something that comes from also the Jewish media, to the ceasefire had been a serious, a reliable counterpart in that endeavor, then you would have deprived all those groups of their narrative, and either we help Israel by treating with Pezeshkian to deflate these groups, or we could have let Israel target this group, and yet it would have not led to any crisis of the dimensions we have right now, because the crisis doesn't come from the possibility of a war with Lebanon. It comes from the possibility of a war with Iran, case in which Israel cannot win without American assistance. Then another goal is that Netanyahu has supported is that the base of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are pushing for resettling Gaza. Remember that once there were settlers in Gaza who were removed by another prime minister, and to expand West Bank settlements that, according to even Jewish media, have reached record levels. Then another problem we have, another obstacle, is the long-term damage caused in West Bank and Gaza. Because you could say right now they are too afraid to retaliate, and that's true. But there is going to be a moment in which the dust will settle and they are start mourning. And when they start mourning, their death, they are going to become a martyr factory. You only have to see the experience of the two past intifadas to realize that this is going to be true, that there are going to be more radicals that are going to join Hamas or the new version of Hamas, and they are going to push them to even more extreme levels, because their top priority is not going to be Palestine's independence, it's going to be revenge. And we have over 40,000 dead, the overwhelming majority of which are civilians. So there are plenty of people who are be willing to be suicide bombers in the name of Palestine. Now, the other obstacle we have is that though Biden seems to have realized that just recently, it was clear for whoever had eyes that that Netanyahu was trying to help Trump. Well, why is that? Because Trump would give him a blank check. And why does he want a blank check? Precisely for what we mentioned. He has referred Ben Gavir and Smotrich, the representatives, the top representatives of the Israeli far right, who are dead set on expanding settlements in Gaza and the West Bank, and for that he needs a blank check. So his actions, Netanyahu's actions with respect to Biden's naive ceasefire, are going to be determined by that goal. And then we have, as I mentioned, the other obstacle, Sinwar. And why is Sinwar the leader of Hamas? Because Netanyahu killed Haniyeh. Haniyeh, I'm not shedding tears for Haniyeh as I don't shed tears for any other terrorist, but Haniyeh was open to serious negotiations. And who removed that obstacle for Sinwar? Netanyahu. So Sinwar, the mastermind of October 7, is now the leader of Hamas. And not surprised, he has recently made a call for renew the intifada tactics of suicide bombers. So history repeating itself, and unfortunately, it has been a Democratic administration who is repeating those mistakes. Then, what leverage do we have? Well, the closer we get to the November elections, the more difficult it's going to be to sell a new narrative. And a new narrative based on the Olmer plan that I call the Olmer narrative. Why? Because then you are going to be, if you are a Democrat, you are going to be trapped as a Republican light. Otherwise, you are going to be portrayed as selling Israel and aiding the destroyers of Israel and the Holocaust and etc. And why is that? Because to sell a narrative, you need time, you need repetition. And the closer we get to the November elections, you get trapped on the old narrative. Unfortunately, no serious effort has been made in that direction. Then, because of what we mentioned about the polls, Biden could have used up to for a long time the Olmer plan to convoke the opposition to try to provoke a split inside Likud to convoke Galant as part of a new government with Lapid and Gantz. The problem is that with the state of the polls, with the trend shown by the polls, that window of opportunity is almost closed. Then what other leverage we have? One I don't like, but that is the only one we still have, that is the weapons. So now that Macron has a call for suspending weapons aid to Israel unless Netanyahu signs a ceasefire, the only option I see is using that as leverage. No ceasefire, no weapons. The problem, the reason I don't like this proposal is that this proposal still leaves us with Netanyahu as the counterpart, and it's a very unreliable counterpart. It's going to be extremely difficult. It's going to waste lots of resources to try to direct Netanyahu in the right direction. So, but at this point, it may be the only one we have. I still wish we could try an Ormer plan to convoke the opposition. But as I said, we should at least try, but I'm not confident as I was before that this could still work. Then I would like to talk about the effects of this conflict in our foreign policy. Number one, we have effects on Ukraine. It's not just only because of the weapons, of the artillery we are diverting from Ukraine to Israel, but because of the risk of a Putin victory. Nevertheless, I'm going to expand more on this issue, on what a Putin victory in Ukraine means in another video. Then another effect on US foreign policy is going to be China. In the ASEAN, this is the first year a poll that is normally conducted among the elites of those countries show more support for China than for America. Most of the change is explained by countries of Muslim faith, like Malaysia, and why are so displeased, where they are so displeased with America, because precisely of our Netanyahu policy. Another effect is going to be in the Middle East. Islamists are going to use the Palestinian cause as a flag to raise their visibility and influence. And they are already threatening to destabilize Jordan. And why is this so worrisome? Because of the effects, the the effects of the number of casualties and the horror created by Netanyahu in those areas, and the long-term damage inflicted in the West Bank and Gaza. Remember that these sentiments could spread very easily, and that's what happened during the Arab Spring. So it's unpredictable how far this sentiment could spread. But at least in Jordan, we are already seeing the effect in the internal policy of Jordan and the rise of Islamists. Then what should be our number one goal in the Middle East should be reviving Obama's nuclear deal. And let me explain something here. Obama, when Obama was president, Rouhani was elected president of Iran. Rouhani succeeded Ahmadinejad, who was a radical. Rouhani was a moderate, and because he was a moderate, he signed the deal with Obama. Then it came Trump, and Trump, obsessed with destroying Obama's legacy, flooded Iran with sanctions, undermined Rouhani, and Rouhani lost the next elections. And he lost them to Raisi. Raisi was a hardliner, as Ahmadinejad had been, with an extremist like Raisi signing a new nuclear deal was impossible. But now, after Raisi died and couldn't finish his term, Pezeshkian has been elected. And Pezeshkian is a moderate in the lines of Rouhani. Rouhani, not just that. Not just that, Pezeshkian has made calls to the West to try to rebuild relations. But because Biden's priority is to secure that Netanyahu can win the next elections, because let's not be blind, it's not Israel. Netanyahu has inflicted lots of long-term damage to the security of Israel, has inflicted terrible damage to the Israeli economy, as you can read in the assessment made by the organization that have downgraded their credit rating and has inflicted terrible damage to Israeli democracy, not just with the episode of the Supreme Court, but giving power to the far right inside Israel. So let's not pretend that this is for Israel. This is for Netanyahu. And unfortunately, Biden is undermining Pezeshkian. And so the chances of reviving Obama's nuclear deal for the sake of saving Netanyahu. Now, you could say that Obama's nuclear deal should have included the role of Iran's proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas. Okay, include these issues in a new deal in which you revive but that requires a two-state solution. Otherwise, what you are asking is the unconditional capitulation of those insurgencies, and that is not going to happen. So we also have that obstacle. Then how the rest of the world see us? Well, they will see that we are repeating the experience of 2014. You must remember John Kerry saying that famous phrase, a hell of a pinpoint operation when he was duped by Netanyahu. The same way Biden has been duped by Netanyahu today, in this last year. Besides the temper tantrums, the Biden's temper tantrums against Netanyahu that has been portrayed in Bob Woodward's new book, War, the matter of the fact is that he have kept supplying him with weapons. But this is amazing. Even in 2015, to punish Obama, Netanyahu got to speak in Congress. And this year, bizarre, with Schumer vote, Netanyahu got to speak in Congress to undermine Biden, but this time with Democratic votes. Then, another issue we have to consider when we see how the world will react to us is the double standard. Netanyahu dupes Biden and Biden dupes Zelensky. If you are a country in the world who have to choose between the United States and China, who would you choose? Would you like to be Zelensky? Of course not. So, or even if you have, you want to believe in America, America will be seen as unreliable paper tiger. So you will accommodate to China. This is a courtesy of Blinken and Sullivan, the two inept, incompetent people who are leading our foreign policy in the Biden administration. Then they also will see our red lines. Remember the red lines we set in Rafah, in the south, and the humanitarian aid and the famine it caused, the Netanyahu's tactics cost in that area. Then more recent, and that's not the only one. There have been several other red lines set by Biden, all of them crossed by Netanyahu without consequence. Then you will see the targets in Iran. More recently, Biden said that the oil facilities and nuclear facilities were out of the question. Now Biden is saying that that oil facilities were under discussion. This is the Biden administration. So that brings us finally to what Harris can do. If you have read some of my tweets and considering that what I am proposing is that Harris has to break with Biden on Palestine, you would say that the Logan Act would not allow that. But she's still part of the Biden administration. So if she cannot push Biden in the right direction, even though it's probably too late, she can at least win in the narrative. But she has been keep repeating the Biden line that we will tell Bibi that he's a bad boy when he doesn't do what we say, and he never does. But we will keep supplying him with weapons. This is weakness. And Harris, unfortunately, has repeated that line with other words, but it's basically the same. What's the problem with this? That if she continues this way and wins the elections, Netanyahu is going to swallow her foreign policy because of the discredit the United States is going to have, because of the resources the United States he will have to devote to Netanyahu's government. Another consequence Harris has to take into account is the effect on the Arab American vote, which she has lost significantly. And what is the main cause of this dysfunction inside the Harris campaign with respect to Palestine is Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, a terrible choice for campaign manager. Jennifer O'Malley Dillon was Biden's campaign manager, but Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, her priority is to legitimize her people in the Biden administration so she can move her base of power to the Harris administration. That's why she kept parading Harris with Biden in many rallies. But Harris has to be much more intelligent. You cannot be look at the direction, polls about the direction of the country. Look at the huge disapproval of the Biden administration. You cannot be the candidate of change if you go parade right and left with Biden, who represents the status quo, and much worse, a very unpopular status quo. So there is hope, there is leverage, yes, but even though the best windows of opportunity might have closed, we still have hope, but hope if we push for the right policies. What we have seen in American politics is that this issue has been reduced to fanboy activism. So what team are you rooting for, Israel or Palestine? And that destroys any possibility of finding a solution, because that implies that Israel is identified with Netanyahu and Palestine with Sinwar. And if so, no solution is going to be possible. We have precedents in American policy? Yes, we do. After years of endemic insurgencies in the Philippines, OSS Colonel Edward Lansdale promoted the candidacy of a moderate who was willing to make reforms so you could deflate the political support for the insurgents. And this was Ramon Magsaysay. And this was a good experiment. Unfortunately, Ramon Magsaysay died in an airplane accident. But that's an example that sometimes it's better to endorse the opposition, but you have to do it with a new narrative. Otherwise, you are just going to repeat history. In Vietnam, we supported Diem, and Diem ended up being a psychopath who literally killed all the opposition. And then when we finally killed Diem, there was no opposition with whom we could respond to the Viet Cong. So we need to use the Olmer narrative to try to convoke the opposition, try to convoke Galan, try to push for new elections, demanded not by Schumer, by the Israelis. And if it's too late for that, at least we have to use the Macron option. But you cannot do that rooting for a team, expecting messiahs. You have to do it with policy. You have to push politicians, as I mentioned in my first video, with ideas, the same way as Roosevelt, my favorite president, taught us in the 30s. Well, see you next time. Thank you.